It's not enough to just say, hey, let's focus on the good stuff. Everything's going to be fine. Here's our positive approach. I actually think that modality of art is losing a lot of steam, because there's got to be room to feel into the suffering and the weight of the world.
Hey there, I'm Jesse Mayshark, and this is Headlights, Voices from the Progressive South. Headlights is a production of the Progressive South, a nonprofit media platform dedicated to amplifying progressive voices and values across the southern United States. Voices like Leah, one of the co-founders of the remarkable band Rising Appalachia, which has spent the past 2 decades combining various strands of southern music with a commitment to social justice and community building. I caught up with her last week on their current tour through southern Appalachia to talk about their work both on and off stage and the importance of providing spaces for people to come together. That's coming up shortly. Also, in our arts and culture segment this week, we'll talk about a Hispanic cultural celebration coming up in Alabama. But first, it's time for the news roundup. And the news here in Tennessee is that the troops are coming. President Donald Trump last week ordered the deployment of the National Guard to Memphis to crack down on crime, in what he said would be a, quote, replica of Guard efforts in Washington, D.C. But the Memphis mission is different from the D.C. deployment in several ways, and it could be a harbinger of things to come for cities in the South. Washington, D.C., of course, is a federally administered district. Although it has some degree of self-rule with its own local government, it remains beholden to the federal government for funding and is subject to significant federal oversight. That has given Trump a freer hand to take control of local law enforcement, although even that authority is being challenged in court. But there are more restrictions on the use of the National Guard in the rest of the country, in the 50 states. In general, the Guard is to be deployed at the request or direction of a state's governor. A president can ask a governor to deploy the Guard within a state, but in most cases cannot compel it. There are exceptions that allow the president to federalize and deploy Guard troops, primarily to enforce federal laws and court orders, or in support of specified homeland defense activities. Those activities do not include local law enforcement. In fact, that is expressly forbidden by the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878. For historical context, the reason that law was passed after the end of Reconstruction and the withdrawal of federal troops from the South was that the southern states wanted assurances that they would not continue to be subject to federal military oversight, and that they could go back to running their own affairs and enforcing the law as they saw fit. Federal troops did return to the South, of course, during the fights over desegregation. Presidents Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson at various points federalized National Guard troops in Arkansas and Alabama to protect students and civil rights protesters from violations of court orders and individual rights by those states' authorities. We're now obviously in a very different situation. When Trump federalized Guard troops in Los Angeles this summer, he faced resistance from state and local lawmakers, and earlier this month a federal court ruled that the deployment did in fact violate the Posse Comitatus Act. That case remains under appeal. In the meantime, Trump has threatened, but not yet carried out, a mass deployment of troops to Chicago, where he would also face tremendous resistance from both the state and local levels. One supposition about Trump's motives for these shows of force is that he wants to intimidate major cities in blue states that are strongholds for his political opposition. But the Los Angeles deployment showed the challenges of that approach, with results that have been indeterminate at best. Besides the legal entanglements, there's also the risk of galvanizing the very opposition he seeks to quell. That doesn't mean he won't follow through on threats to deploy to Chicago, Baltimore, or New York City, but it might explain a broadening of his focus to now encompass cities in much friendlier states. When governors from 6 states, including Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Tennessee, agreed to send their own Guard troops to help with the Washington, D.C. mission, many critics noted that some of their own cities had crime rates as high or higher than D.C. That was intended as kind of a gotcha line, but it overlooked the political dynamics in our southern states, where major metropolitan areas are often big blue dots in a very red map. Conservative leaders in these states don't need anyone to tell them to crack down on their cities. They've been doing that in various ways for years. So it was not a surprise that when Trump added 2 southern cities, Memphis and New Orleans, to his list of places he might send the Guard for law enforcement support, the Republican governors and legislators of those states hurried to second the motion. And when the official order came to deploy to Memphis last week, Tennessee Governor Bill Lee welcomed it and said he was, quote, tired of crime holding the great city of Memphis back. Lee joined Trump in the Oval Office for the announcement alongside Tennessee Senators Marsha Blackburn and Bill Hagerty. Notably absent, of course, were any local officials from Memphis or Shelby County, both of which have governments dominated by black Democrats in a state dominated by white Republicans. The racial calculus of all of this is hard to miss. All of the cities Trump has mentioned most prominently in his threats to send troops currently have black Democratic mayors and large black populations. Memphis is the only large city in Tennessee with a majority-minority population. About 63% of its residents are black and another 10% are Hispanic. It is the poorest of the state's major cities and has long had the state's highest crime rates. It is usually in the top 10 highest crime rate cities in the country, depending on which calculation you look at, often in the top 5 and sometimes at number 1. Nobody denies that crime is a problem in Memphis. But local officials there, like local officials in most cities, see crime as part of a broader matrix of socioeconomic problems, and one that can't be addressed independently of poverty, housing, education, healthcare, and other needs. In contrast, the Trumpian approach is to treat crime as essentially a villainous scourge enabled by a local reluctance to get, quote, tough enough. The old soft-on-crime accusation that conservatives have used against political opponents for generations, regardless of the crime rate at any given time. That's why the military is ostensibly offered as a solution, because what could be tougher than armed troops and tanks rolling down city streets? Such an approach could produce short-term declines in criminal activity, which seems to be the case in Washington, D.C. But even the declines there have been modest and come as the city has been seeing an overall drop in crime this year anyway. But in a way, the military's inability to solve crime in any given city could end up justifying its continued, perhaps indefinite, presence. While the National Guard in the past has primarily been deployed on short-term missions in the wake of natural disasters or massive civic unrest, sending them in to fight as amorphous a foe as crime does not provide any obvious point at which victory could be declared. In southern states with their fraught histories of federal military action, it is also hard not to see some level of retribution. After the Civil War and during desegregation, the presence of federal troops was on behalf of the region's black population, imposed against the will of the conservative white power structure. In the grins and relish with which Lee, Blackburn, and Hagerty greeted the announcement of this much different mission in Memphis, there was more than a trace of just desserts, a sense that that conservative white power structure, now empowered in ways it has not been since the passage of the Civil Rights Act, is riding back into town in command of the same forces that once held it in check. Whatever happens with troop deployments in the blue states, it may be something that cities in red states can expect to see more of. All right, now it's time for my interview with Leah Song. She is one of the 2 co-founders of Rising Appalachia, along with her sister, Chloe Smith. The 2 grew up in Atlanta, and they formed the band that would become Rising Appalachia in 2005, initially recording an album under their own names, Leah and Chloe. When that produced a lot of positive feedback, they decided to make a go of it and named themselves Rising Appalachia. Over the 2 decades since, they have released 11 studio and live albums which draw on a wide range of influences. Starting from a foundation of Appalachian string band music, Leah plays banjo and Chloe plays fiddle, among other things, they have folded in soul, gospel, Americana, R&B, and folk music from around the world. Their most recent album is last year's Folk and Anchor, which features 7 songs by other artists ranging from Beyoncé to Bob Dylan, performed in the band's distinctive style. This year, they've released a new single, Lady Liberty, about the Statue of Liberty and its promises to newly arriving immigrants. Throughout, they have always combined music with community-building activism. They invite local nonprofit organizations to have tables at their shows, and they launched a tour in 2016 in partnership with the Permaculture Action Network, which encourages local sustainable agriculture. They split their time between Atlanta, New Orleans, and Asheville, North Carolina, spanning the South both geographically and culturally. After Hurricane Helene devastated western North Carolina last year, they organized a benefit album called Drenched in Place, with contributions from artists including Layla McCalla, the Rosin Sisters, and Ben Salih. Their songs carry consistent messages of connection, hope, and insistence on justice. As they embarked on a short tour of Appalachian cities this fall, I thought it would be a good time to talk about the power and importance of art and music in helping to bring people together in a difficult time. The tour will conclude this weekend with 2 concerts in Black Mountain, North Carolina, on the anniversary of Hurricane Helene. So, Seth, let's go to the tape. Leah Song, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having us on.
To start off with, I was wondering if you could just tell me a little bit about this short tour you're on, and especially its concluding shows in Black Mountain, which are going to be coming up this weekend. What was the impetus for this tour, and what are you hoping that people take away from these concerts in particular?
Yeah, absolutely. We've spent a season kind of catching our breath and in the recording studio and doing some travel overseas, and we really wanted to deepen back into our roots in Southern Appalachia. It's always a region that has been part of our home and our life and our bedrock and our culture, but it has even more meaning now that we are coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the storm. So it's really got a whole nother layer of meaning, I think, right now for us. And we'll be kind of gathering our resources, and it feels real beautiful to be. We're in Tennessee and Kentucky and Virginia, just sort of deepening into the fabric of the Appalachian late summer, but then spending the rest of the month really, really rooted into Western North Carolina and storytelling and catharsis and the grief of, what's been taken away from that land and our communities there. So it's a big month for us. Yeah.
Well, so I feel like from the beginning, Rising Appalachia has always brought a focus on social justice and activism and kind of community building to everything you do. And, obviously some musicians shy away from that kind of engagement. Some of them dabble in it and then get backlash for it. But it's always seemed just kind of a natural part of the fabric of what you all do. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little about how did that develop from the beginning, and why has that remained central to your work?
Totally. Well, I definitely think in the era of infinite divisiveness, we do also feel the whiplash of that, in our own community and in our own work. There's just so many opinions about what to do and how to do it right or wrong in every direction. But I think that hasn't taken the rug out from underneath us in a way, because we've always wanted music to be catharsis and kind of a sounding board in a way for bigger and broader community dialogue. And that was important to us before we were musicians. We wanted to figure out how to make community spaces and creative spaces where we don't necessarily carry the answers, and we would never say that we do carry the answers. We're just as indebted and tangled up in the craziness of the times. But I think what we're very, very committed to is the notion of gathering folks together and making space for community leaders to speak, making space for folks to get to know one another, and folks who have different opinions to be able to rub shoulders and rub elbows. And that is the real purpose and taproot, I think, of our work, is to be community gathering spaces. And actually strengthened more and more and more over the years. It strengthened after the years of COVID, where we felt like, oh, we really, really want to make sure we have space to be together in person. And, it strengthens now since the storms have come through to say so many solutions, and actually so much empathy and understanding can come from being in three-dimensional form with one another, and so much gets lost in our screens and in our devices and in the silos of cyber activism, or the opposite, which would be cyberbullying, and just all the places where we all get stuck online. You really lose so much of our humanity there. So we don't have all the answers figured out, and I don't even know that we would use the word activist as much with our work as much as we would just say, like, we want to gather community, and we want to gather people together, and we want to create a safe space where folks can show up with questions, with different opinions, with different ideas, and that there's a place for that to be, for dialogue and dance parties to happen side by side.
Right, yeah, and that the insistence on there being joy alongside the challenges seems like a really consistent through line in your work too, right?
I think so. I think that's a survival strategy for us as well. We've all had chunks of time, perhaps even years, where joy wasn't necessarily the driver, where there was plenty of grief and plenty of anxiety. But I think we've learned over and over and over again that if you don't have joy at the table, it's very hard to find solutions. And I think we believe in the long haul, which is that we got to be figuring out how to do better by one another, and how to find each other's shared humanity. So joy has made the long haul. Yeah.
Well, and, you talk about the opportunity to bring people together. And obviously, like, as you say, after COVID, there was a big surge, I think, of people really seeking that. We're at, what feels like a really divided and divisive moment right now in the country, certainly across the South. I know you all kind of move back and forth between Asheville and Atlanta and New Orleans, and those are all places that have had their own kinds of divisions over time. I guess as everything feels more fraught and polarized in a lot of ways, and you're kind of bringing this, I guess, traveling celebration of community out into these places, do you find that people are, I guess, hungrier than ever for that kind of connection? Are people exhausted? What are you feeling from the people who you are going out and sharing this with now?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. I do just want to emphasize that even though there is celebration and there is kind of a community focus, that there's also grief, and there's also that forlorn sense of, I think that also some of our music holds plenty of its weight in longing and in, a sense of seeking and making room for the hard stuff as well. And I think that's also really needed. I shun away, and I think we all shun away a little bit from the, bliss seekers. It's not enough to just say, hey, let's focus on the good stuff. Everything's going to be fine. Here's our positive approach. That I actually think that modality of art is losing a lot of steam, because there's got to be room to feel into the suffering and the weight of the world. It can feel incredibly topsy-turvy. And I think that our audiences are equally at the shows to be drawn to a place where they feel like they can mourn and emote and grieve and wail and holler. And, we try and create a space where all of those feelings and emotions and sensations will be met in the body of music. So we try and take you a little bit on a journey of, a journey of sound, where there will be some comedy and there will be some grief, and there'll be side by side. And I think that's our most honest offering, if we're really holding the art and the space honestly.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of all of that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of journeys of sound, I mean, one thing that I really love about your music is the way you have always kind of so easily incorporated so many different genres and cultures and like reaching across the South, but really across the globe. And to me, what I hear in that is a reflection of, the actual diversity of Appalachia and the South, which has always been there, even if it hasn't always been recognized or celebrated. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious, how did that evolve over time? How deliberate is that for you? And how much is it just kind of a product of what you're hearing, what you're discovering? And also, how do you then maintain the musical foundations of what you do and bring all of those other things into it?
Yeah, great question. That's our lifelong opus right there, to figure that out and do it well. My sister and I were raised in Atlanta, Georgia, and we were raised very much in an incredibly diverse public school system in the urban South, where our primary languages, creative languages, had a lot to do with spoken word, and hip-hop and neo-soul and Outkast and Goody Mob came to our middle schools and presented, the music of the South, which was the exploding Southern hip-hop. And that was our community. Those were our peers. Those were our teachers. That was our school. And our mother and father were both blues and old-time Appalachian banjo and fiddle and guitar players. So we would go to school and be kind of immersed in the Southern vernacular of the urban South, and we would go home and we would be immersed in the sounds of the old-time mountain music. And both of those were very true to our upbringing. So when we named the project Rising Appalachia, that was really a physical reference of how we were raised. We have this Appalachian storyline. We spent a lot of our weekends in the Mountain South at various different old-time mountain music, fiddle and banjo camps. And we also wanted to rise out of it and have the dialogues musically and otherwise around all of the different influences of music in the South, which is a very, very wide influence. The African roots of the banjo, the Irish roots of the fiddle, the blues and soul that has come out of Louisiana and Mississippi, the Delta blues. So our first relationship to the musical diversity was in our homes and in our home region, where we were like, oh, the sound of the South is so much wider than people think. It's classified, by race recordings, and it's classified by all of these different genres of music that really limits the understanding of what a melting pot of music came out of the South and still comes out of the South. So our first line of business was the musicology of the South, which, we reference and listen to and have studied with Rhianna Giddens over the years, and the work that the Carolina Chocolate Drops are doing, bringing attention back to the Black traditions of the old-time and Americana Southern fiddle and banjo music. We've been very, very blessed to work alongside some of our incredible godparents and musical mentors in Georgia who are holding a lot of the traditions around the blues and the Cajun influences. So this is all just the meat of a personal obsession, but also our band's obsession is digging into all these different roots of the sounds that come out of the South. And once you start stirring in those places, the world starts opening up. You realize, actually, the roots of this old Appalachian ballad tie directly to the Highlands of Scotland. The roots of this banjo tune tie directly to the akonting, which is an instrument from West Africa. And, all of a sudden the conversations start widening and widening and widening. And so we hope to be studying that for our whole lives. It's a wonderful deep dive into the source of our musical root. And we we do some traditional and we do some original, but it's
Right.
all tied into a lot of those kind of back porch studies.
Right, absolutely. Well, I wanted to ask you about the song you released recently, Lady Liberty, which obviously feels timely, reflecting on the immigrant experience in America. I guess, why did you want to, like, what spurred that song right now, and what are you trying to convey with that?
Yeah, totally. My sister wrote that song, and she wrote it from top to bottom. We often do some co-writing. Sometimes one of us spearheads it, but that was really a beautiful writing prompt that she brought to the table. And she wanted to write a song through the voice of the Statue of Liberty. She really kind of put herself out of the way and tried to write as the Statue of Liberty herself. And the lyrics are taken from the poem at the base of the statue. Mm-hmm. And it feels unbelievably pivotal for what's happening right now in the story of this country. And, you know, a historical reminder for us about the founding origins, roots, promises, documents of the history of this country. And I think that the lines really, really say it themselves. Like, this was a nation of refugees and immigrants and people seeking a better life and fleeing persecution to come to a place where they were able to pursue freedom. And it feels incredibly, incredibly fraught now with tireless divisiveness, and a sense of hospitality that used to be a real sense of pride in the South, even, where you really sense now there's fear of the stranger, fear of the other, really much less of a willingness to have conversations around and with folks that you maybe don't have the same background with. And it's a long story, but Lady Liberty was very much a song released to ask these questions of us again. Like, where are we standing in this conversation? What are we asking of ourselves? What are we asking of our community? And what are ways that we can make sense out of such a maddening time?
Yeah. All right. Well, I wanted to wrap up just by asking you what comes next. I know you're going to finish out this tour, and what are you looking ahead to over the next year or so?
Yeah. So we have this September's Appalachian commitments, which have been wonderful, and we are in the very tail end of completing a brand new full-length album, which has been many, many, many years in the making. So that's very, very exciting for us to have. It's going to be a 16-song album with lots of originals and some traditionals as well. And so that's in the works. And I myself have been spending a little bit of time over in Ireland and Wales and digging into some of the relationship with my ancestral lineage and wrapping around some of the Gaelic language songs and stories. It's been very wonderful to begin to widen the circles back towards some of our ancestral roots. And we'll see what this next year brings. We're working on the album release, and then we're gonna follow the invitations. Very much, much of our work is led by invitation and not by insistence. So right. We'll see who comes our way, I think.
All right. Well, I'm very much looking forward to the show in Knoxville tonight. So look forward to seeing you all there. And
yeah, absolutely.
Thanks again so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And I did go to that show here in Knoxville last week, and it was really great. Fantastic playing, beautiful harmonies from Leah and her sister, and just a really warm atmosphere in the room. If you're in or near Black Mountain this weekend, and you can still get a ticket to either of those shows, I highly recommend it. If, on the other hand, you're in Birmingham, Alabama, let's say, you have another good option, the annual Fiesta, a day-long celebration of the city's Hispanic and Latino culture and populations. This is the festival's 23rd year and is the state's largest Hispanic cultural event. It will feature a cultural village showcasing the arts and culture of more than 20 Caribbean, Latin American, and European countries, along with a food village that will have traditional favorite culinary options from all of those places. There will also be music and dance performances, health and wellness resources, and more. As a city, Birmingham has been on a long-term population decline since the 1960s, driven primarily by white flight after the Civil Rights era. The city limits population fell from about 340,000 in 1960 to around 200,000 in 2020. It is now a majority-minority city, and about two-thirds of its population is black. The Hispanic and Latino communities are still small, but they are growing. As of 2024, those populations had grown by about 57% over the prior 12 years in the Birmingham metro area. They were projected to keep growing by about 4% a year, although it's unknown what impact the Trump administration's anti-immigrant policies might have on that. In any case, the Fiesta will run from noon to 8 p.m. this Saturday, September 27th, in Lynn Park in downtown Birmingham. So if you're in town, stop by and sample the wares. And that wraps us up for this week. Remember, the Progressive South is a nonprofit media outlet, and you can find information about contributing to our efforts on our website, theprogressivesouth.org. If you do feel moved to make a donation, first of all, thank you. And second, make sure you make a note in the comments accompanying it that it is for the Progressive South. Thanks to Bark for our theme music and to Lord Seth the Libertarian for his production work here at Barbarian Productions. And thanks to you for listening. Remember, you can call and say hey from wherever you are. Just leave us a message at 865-214-7764. That's 865-214-PROG. Tell us your first name, where you're calling from, and take up to a minute to let us know what's going on where you are. You can also write me at jmayshark@theprogressivesouth.org.